"You brought a jar of honey to a medical examination?" the alien professor asked, staring at the small glass container in the human doctor's hand. "Are you trying to remind us what medicine looked like before civilization existed?" The entire classroom laughed. Dr. Michael Carter looked at the hundreds of advanced medical devices surrounding him, then back at the jar he had carried across millions of miles from Earth. He did not look embarrassed. He did not look angry. He simply placed the jar on the table and said, "No, I brought it to remind you that civilization did not begin when machines became powerful." The laughter stopped. Deep inside the Aurelia Medical Academy, the most prestigious medical institution in the Galactic Alliance, 30 alien students watched the human doctor with confused expressions. They had expected someone from Earth to arrive carrying experimental technology, military-grade scanners, or some impossible invention from a world that had recently joined the stars. Instead, Michael Carter walked into their advanced biology classroom wearing a simple dark jacket, carrying a small notebook, and holding a jar of honey like it was more valuable than a room full of machines. At the front of the classroom stood Dr. Valen Threx, the Academy's leading researcher and the man who believed modern medicine had finally conquered nature itself. Valen was a brilliant physician from the Valerian species, known across the galaxy for developing treatments that could repair damaged cells in minutes. His students admired him. His rivals feared him. And he had spent his entire career proving that technology was the answer to every medical problem. "Dr. Carter," Valen said calmly, walking toward the table, "our students expected a demonstration of human medical science. We have prepared a cellular regeneration system, a diagnostic AI, and a complete molecular analysis chamber. Yet you arrived with something found in a container." Michael glanced around the room. The walls were covered with glowing displays. Robotic assistants moved silently between stations. Every surface seemed designed to prove one thing. The galaxy had moved beyond simple solutions. "I did bring something important," Michael replied. "A lesson." A few students exchanged amused looks. One of them, Lyra Voss, a young medical prodigy known for solving complex biological problems before her classmates even understood them, raised her hand. "Dr. Carter, with respect, honey is a nutritional substance. It may have historical value, but our medical systems can analyze and recreate any useful compound within seconds." Michael nodded. "That is probably true." Lyra looked surprised. She expected an argument. "Then why bring it?" she asked. Michael looked at the jar for a moment. He thought about his grandmother's old kitchen on Earth, about the small remedies people passed down through generations before anyone understood the science behind them. He remembered how simple things often carried stories that technology could not replace. Because knowing how something works is not the same as understanding why it matters. The room became quiet. Even Dr. Valen paused. He had expected pride from the human. He had expected a challenge. He had expected someone trying to prove humanity was superior. Instead, Michael stood there with the patience of someone who had nothing to prove. "Today," Michael said, placing the jar beneath the classroom scanner, "you are going to learn something humanity discovered a long time ago." The machines powered on. The students leaned forward. And for the first time that morning, the most advanced medical academy in the galaxy became curious about the simplest object in the room. Lyra Voss leaned closer to the scanner as pale blue light swept across the honey. For 3 seconds, nobody spoke. Then the machine chimed. "Analysis complete," the classroom system announced. "Organic nutritional substance. High sugar concentration. Trace enzymes. Plant-derived compounds. No advanced therapeutic engineering detected." A few students laughed again. Lyra folded her arms. "So the most advanced scanner in the Alliance agrees with me." Michael Carter gave her an easy nod. "It agrees that you know what is inside the jar." "That was the question." "No," Michael said. "That was the easy question." Dr. Valen Threx stepped between them before Lyra could answer. His patience was beginning to thin. He had agreed to host a human physician because the Academy administration wanted greater cultural exchange with Earth, not because he believed his students needed lessons from folk remedies. "Perhaps we should accelerate the demonstration," Valen said. With a gesture, he activated the workstations surrounding the room. Transparent cases opened one after another, revealing compact medical devices worth more than some planetary hospitals. Every student was instructed to bring the most advanced treatment available to their species. "Let us compare results rather than philosophies." That changed the mood immediately. Students moved toward their stations. Lyra uncovered a silver cylinder no larger than a flashlight. Adaptive nanosite suspension, she said. It identifies damaged tissue, determines the cause, and constructs a treatment inside the patient. Michael whistled softly. That is impressive. Lyra hesitated. Again, he was refusing to compete. Across the room, another student displayed a regenerative membrane capable of closing damaged tissue without conventional sutures. Someone else brought a programmable antimicrobial field. Every demonstration seemed designed to make Michael's little glass jar look older and smaller. Valen watched him carefully. Still confident? About what? That nature has something left to teach us. Michael smiled. Nature has been running experiments longer than either of us. Before Valen could respond, an alarm sounded from the central teaching platform. The room lights shifted from white to amber. Students froze. Professor? Lyra asked. Valen turned toward the main display. A medical simulation had activated automatically, but this was not one of the routine exercises scheduled for the morning. A patient profile appeared above the platform. Juvenile Kesari, chronic immune dysfunction, recurring microbial infection, severe intolerance to standard regenerative treatment. Lyra stared at the data. That case is restricted. Michael noticed Valen's expression change. The arrogance disappeared for half a second, replaced by something much more human than Valen probably intended to show. Worry. What is it? Michael asked. Valen did not answer immediately. This is not a classroom exercise, he finally said. It is a real case from the Academy Hospital. Lyra stepped toward the display. I thought the patient was improving. So did we. New information poured across the screen. Treatment after treatment appeared beside the same word. Rejected. Nanosites rejected. Regenerative therapy rejected. Synthetic immune support rejected. The room that had been laughing at Michael 5 minutes earlier became painfully quiet. Lyra swallowed. We have technology from 12 civilizations in this room. Valen looked at the failed treatments. And none of it has worked. Michael moved closer, studying the biological readings instead of the list of machines that had failed. He noticed something strange in the immune response. Then something stranger in the microbial profile. How long have you been treating the disease? He asked. 11 months, Valen replied. Michael shook his head. That is not what I asked. Valen turned toward him. Michael pointed at the display. How long have you been treating the disease instead of treating the patient? Nobody laughed this time. Lyra looked from the medical data to the jar still sitting beneath the scanner. You think that can help? Michael picked it up. I think your machines are answering every question except the one the body is asking. Then the hospital alert changed from amber to red. The red alert silenced every voice in the room. Valen crossed to the central console and opened the hospital channel. Medical Academy, Threx speaking. A tired voice answered immediately. Professor, the Kesari patient is deteriorating. The latest immune support cycle failed. We need authorization for another intervention. Valen stared at the treatment history floating above the desk. Prepare the nanosite protocol. Michael stepped beside him. You already tried that. Valen kept his eyes on the display, at a lower concentration, and the patient rejected it, which is why we adjust the concentration. Michael glanced at Lyra. She had stopped looking confident. What happens when it fails again? Valen finally faced him. We do not stand around doing nothing. Neither do doctors on Earth. Michael pointed toward the microbial profile. But sometimes doing more is exactly what keeps you from seeing the problem. Valen's jaw tightened. Then enlighten us. Michael enlarged the patient history. 11 months of treatment filled the display. Every time the infection returned, the hospital responded with something stronger. Every time the patient's natural microbial balance shifted further. Michael had seen the pattern before, not in alien medicine, but in ordinary hospitals back home where aggressive treatment could sometimes create a new problem while solving the old one. You keep treating every microorganism like an enemy, he said. Lyra stepped closer. They are causing the infection. Some are not. Michael moved through the records. Where is the baseline microbiome? Nobody answered. He looked around. You mapped the patient's genome, cellular repair rate, immune signaling, even metabolic waste. Where is the record of the organisms that normally live with this species? Lyra blinked. Kesari medicine does not consider resident microorganisms clinically relevant unless they become pathogenic. Michael looked at Valen. There is your blind spot. Valen gave a short, humorless laugh. You are proposing that harmless microbes somehow matter more than an active infection? I am proposing that a forest is more than the trees you want to cut down. Lyra studied the data again. This time she searched differently. A new comparison appeared. Her expression changed. Professor. Valen ignored her. Dr. Carter, metaphors do not treat patients. No, but bad assumptions can hurt them. Professor, Lyra repeated louder. She turned the display toward him. Look at this. The room gathered around her station. She had compared the patient's earliest sample with the most recent one. The difference was enormous. Entire populations of harmless microorganisms had vanished during treatment. In their place, one resistant strain had expanded into the empty biological space. Valen stared at the numbers. Run it again. Lyra did. Same result. One of the students whispered. We cleared everything that competed with it. Michael nodded. You did not just attack the problem. You cleared the neighborhood for it. Valen stood completely still. For the first time that morning, nobody cared about the expensive machines surrounding them. The hospital channel interrupted again. Professor, we need a decision. Valen looked at Michael, then at the jar in his hand. You believe honey fixes this? No, Michael said. And if anyone tells you a jar of honey cures every infection, do not let them near a hospital. A nervous laugh moved through the students, breaking the tension for half a second. Michael set the jar beside the patient data. The honey is a clue. Earth learned a long time ago that some natural substances can make life difficult for certain microbes without pretending biology is simple. The lesson is not to dump this into your patient. The lesson is to stop assuming newer automatically means smarter. Lyra suddenly enlarged another result from the scan. Dr. Carter. Michael looked over. The Academy scanner had completed a deeper analysis of the honey. One compound had triggered an unfamiliar interaction model against the resistant Kesari organism. Lyra stared at the prediction twice before speaking. That cannot be right. Valen moved beside her. What did it find? Lyra slowly looked at Michael. Something our medical database has never cataloged. It is not a drug, Lyra said, staring at the molecular model. Then stop looking at it like one, Michael replied. He stepped closer as the scanner separated the honey into hundreds of chemical interactions. Sugars, enzymes, acids, proteins, plant compounds. Nothing looked impressive alone. Together, however, they created an environment the resistant organism clearly did not like. Valen studied the prediction with visible irritation. The model shows suppression, not elimination. Exactly, Michael said. Your entire medical system keeps asking how to destroy the organism. Maybe the better question is how to make it lose the competition. Before Valen could answer, every display in the classroom flashed red. The hospital channel opened automatically. Containment warning. Patient isolation system unstable. Lyra spun toward the main screen. What happened? A technician answered through heavy static. The emergency nanosite preparation activated when the patient alert reached critical status. We stopped the infusion, but the medical chamber interpreted the cancellation as equipment failure. It is trying to restart automatically. Valen was already moving. Shut down the chamber locally. The controls are locked behind the isolation protocol. Valen rushed toward the door. Michael grabbed the jar and followed. Lyra was right behind them. They crossed the academy corridor at a run, passing startled students and service robots as warning lights pulsed overhead. The hospital wing was less than 200 yards away, but Michael felt every second stretch. He had spent years in emergency rooms on Earth. The technology here was different. The feeling was not. Somewhere ahead, a patient needed people to stop arguing and start thinking. They reached isolation control and found 3 technicians fighting the automated system. A transparent barrier separated them from the treatment chamber. Inside, robotic medical arms were positioning a sealed nanosite cartridge above the delivery unit. 30 seconds until automatic treatment, the system announced. Valen attacked the control panel with rapid commands. Override authorization, Threx 7 Alpha. Override denied. I designed this protocol. Patient stabilization priority exceeds physician override. Michael looked around the room. Can you cut power? Life support shares the emergency circuit, Lyra said. We would shut down the patient's environmental controls. 20 seconds. Valen tried another authorization. Denied. Michael studied the chamber instead of the computer. Machines were still machines. However advanced they became, they needed physical connections. Where does the cartridge enter the delivery system? Lyra pointed toward a mechanical coupling beneath the chamber. There, but the housing is sealed. Michael spotted a manual maintenance lever behind a safety cover. That does not look sealed. Valen followed his gaze. It is a mechanical service release. Good. It is meant for technicians. Michael was already crossing the room. Today, I am a technician. 10 seconds. He opened the cover and pulled the release. Nothing happened. Locked, Lyra said. Michael examined the lever. No. Pressurized. He pushed inward first, then turned it a quarter rotation. The coupling disengaged with a heavy click. The cartridge stopped moving. Silence replaced the alarm. Valen stared at him. How did you know? Michael rubbed his hand and shrugged. I have owned a lawn mower. Lyra laughed once, mostly from relief. Then the patient monitor chimed again. The crisis had paused, not ended. Michael returned to the diagnostic display. Now we do this carefully. No miracle cures. No guessing. We test the honey compounds outside the patient first, isolate what is actually causing the effect, then determine whether anything is safe for Kesari biology. Valen looked at him differently now. You are refusing to use the substance you brought. I am refusing to confuse a clue with a treatment. Lyra transferred a microscopic sample into the laboratory analyzer. The resistant organism appeared on the screen beside the isolated honey compounds. 1 minute passed. Then another. A graph began to change. The organism was not dying. Its growth was slowing. More importantly, a harmless Kesari microbe introduced into the model began recovering territory. Lyra leaned toward the display. The balance is returning. Michael watched the competing populations shift. There you go. Valen said nothing for several seconds. Then a second graph appeared, showing an interaction nobody expected. The honey itself was not the most interesting part. One of its natural enzymes was producing a secondary compound when exposed to Kesari tissue chemistry. Valen's expression hardened. That reaction should not be possible. Michael looked at the new molecular structure forming on the screen. Nature does not care what we think should be possible. Valen read the result 3 times before he trusted his own display. Run a contamination check. Lyra did. Clean. Recalibrate the analyzer. Already happening. Michael stood quietly beside them, watching the molecular structure rotate above the console. He knew better than to celebrate an interesting laboratory result. Interesting results had a habit of becoming disappointing results once somebody asked harder questions. Again, Valen ordered. Lyra prepared a second sample, then a third. Different concentrations, different temperatures, different Kesari tissue models. The answer kept coming back the same. The natural enzyme reacted with compounds present in Kesari tissue and created a temporary environment that slowed the resistant organism without wiping out the harmless microbial population around it. Lyra stared at Michael. Your species knew this. Not this exact reaction. But you brought the honey. Because I wanted you to look at the principle, not worship the ingredient. Valen turned sharply. Nobody here worships technology. Michael met his eyes. You built a treatment chamber that tried to medicate a patient after the doctor told it to stop. That landed harder than Valen expected. Lyra lowered her eyes, pretending to study the console. Valen walked to the observation window. Beyond it, the young Kesari patient rested inside a climate-controlled room while medical staff monitored every change. You think I did this to prove a point? Valen asked quietly. Michael's expression softened. No, I think you wanted to save somebody. Then you understand why we kept escalating. I understand exactly why. Michael joined him at the glass. That is what scares me. Valen looked over. Why? Because good intentions make smart people feel safe about bad assumptions. For once, Valen had no quick answer. Behind them, Lyra called out. I found something. She had opened the patient's earliest admission records before the first aggressive treatment cycle. A harmless microbial species appeared repeatedly in the samples. 11 months later, it was almost gone. Lyra overlaid its growth pattern with the resistant organism. They moved in opposite directions. They compete, she said. Michael came closer. Looks that way. Then if we restore the original population, slow down, Michael said. First we prove it. Valen activated the Academy's simulation array. We have enough stored tissue data to build a predictive model. For the next hour, nobody mentioned primitive medicine. Students who had laughed at Michael now crowded around the workstations, feeding old records into the system. Michael moved between them. asking simple questions that kept exposing complicated problems. What changed first? What did the body tolerate before treatment? Which intervention produced the biggest shift? Lyra became increasingly animated as the pattern emerged. Finally, the simulation completed. The harmless organism was reintroduced virtually. The resistant strain lost ground. Then the honey-derived reaction was added at a carefully controlled level. Its expansion slowed further. The patient's simulated immune system stabilized instead of fighting everything at once. A student whispered, "It works." Michael immediately shook his head. "The model works." "That is not the same thing." Valen glanced at him. "You really do not enjoy dramatic moments, do you?" "I am a doctor. Dramatic moments usually mean paperwork." Lyra laughed, but the sound vanished when another message appeared. The Academy Hospital had reviewed their preliminary findings. A senior medical board was requesting an emergency consultation. Valen opened the notice, expecting authorization for expanded testing. His face changed. "What?" Lyra asked. He turned the message toward them. The board was not asking how quickly they could test the approach. They were ordering the research stopped. "Reason?" Michael asked. Valen read the final line aloud. "Unregistered biological methodology derived from a non-standard primitive substance." Lyra stared at him. "They are rejecting it because it came from Earth?" Valen's voice became very quiet. "No. They are rejecting it because if this works, they will have to admit we spent 11 months making the wrong problem worse." Michael looked through the glass at the sleeping patient. He had seen pride inside institutions before. Different planet, same old problem. Then Valen closed the order. "Professor," Lyra said. Valen turned toward the laboratory controls. "Prepare the evidence package." "The board told us to stop." "We are stopping treatment development," Valen replied. "They said nothing about proving them wrong." Michael studied him for a moment, then smiled. "Now you are starting to sound like a scientist." The emergency board meeting began less than an hour after the research order arrived. The entire medical academy was connected through a massive holographic conference system, with senior physicians from across the Galactic Alliance appearing above the central laboratory. Dr. Valen Threx stood at the front of the room beside Michael Carter and Lyra Voss. On the surface, he looked calm, but Michael noticed the small details. The tighter grip on his datapad, the slower breathing, the way his eyes kept moving between the patient records and the officials above them. Valen was not afraid of the board. He was afraid they might be right about one thing. They had built their careers on a belief that advanced medicine meant leaving old methods behind. And now a human doctor had walked into their academy and forced them to question everything. The largest figure on the conference display belonged to Director Cale Oren, head of the Galactic Medical Standards Authority. Unlike Valen, Cale was not a researcher. He was a politician. His job was not to discover new answers. His job was to protect the systems that already existed. "Professor Threx," Cale said, his voice cold and controlled, "your report suggests that an unverified human biological substance may provide a useful medical pathway." "That is not what the report says," Valen replied. "The report says we discovered a biological interaction our current models failed to predict." Cale looked toward Michael. "And this human physician is responsible for this discovery?" Michael stepped forward. "I would not describe it that way." Cale raised an eyebrow. "You would not?" "No. The discovery came from your own scientists. Your own equipment. Your own patient records. I only asked different questions." That answer clearly bothered Cale more than a direct challenge would have. "Dr. Carter, civilizations progress by replacing outdated knowledge with superior knowledge." Michael nodded. Sometimes, Cale repeated. "Yes. Sometimes we replace something because it is outdated. Sometimes we replace something because we forgot why it existed." The room went silent. Lyra watched the officials carefully. She expected anger. Instead, she saw something worse. Uncertainty. Cale changed tactics. "Professor Threx, your reputation is based on precision. Are you willing to risk that reputation over a substance that has never passed Alliance medical approval?" Valen looked through the glass toward the patient room. The young Kesari child was still waiting. The answer should have been easy. Follow regulations. Protect his position. Avoid conflict. For most of his career, that was exactly what he had done. Then he remembered the 11 months of failed treatments. Not because the machines were bad. Not because the doctors did not care. Because everyone in the room had been asking the same question. How do we defeat this problem? Nobody had asked why the body was losing. Yes, Valen said. Every person in the room turned toward him. Cale narrowed his eyes. Excuse me. I said yes. I am willing to risk my reputation to investigate why our methods failed. The director leaned forward. Think carefully, Professor. Valen did not move. I have been thinking carefully for 11 months. The connection ended moments later. The official approval was suspended. The Academy's research access was restricted. Several laboratory systems locked automatically. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. Then Lyra looked at the sealed equipment around them. They actually shut us down. Michael picked up his jar from the table. No, he looked at the locked doors. They shut down the machines. Valen looked at him. And what exactly are we supposed to do without them? Michael smiled slightly. The same thing humans did for thousands of years. Which is? Michael opened his notebook. Observe. Test. Learn. Before anyone could respond, Lyra's personal device received a hidden message. She opened it, expecting another restriction notice. Instead, her face changed. Professor, Valen walked over. What is it? She turned the screen toward them. It was not from the medical authority. It was from the Academy Hospital. A second patient had developed the same condition. And this time, the standard treatments had failed even faster. Michael looked at the new case file. Valen understood immediately. This was no longer about proving a theory. It was about whether they could find an answer before more patients needed one. Then another message appeared. The sender was unknown. The final line contained only one sentence. Stop searching before you discover something the galaxy is not ready to know. The message on Lyra Voss's screen remained visible for only 3 seconds before it disappeared. Someone had remotely erased it. But 3 seconds was more than enough. Michael Carter had already read it. So had Valen. Can you recover the sender information? Valen asked. Lyra immediately opened the security logs. Her fingers moved quickly across the interface. No identification. No network trace. Whoever sent it bypassed Academy encryption. Michael looked at the locked laboratory equipment surrounding them. Someone with enough access to shut down this research also has enough access to watch it. Valen turned toward him. You think someone inside the medical authority is involved? I think someone is afraid of what happens if you prove your old methods were not the only answer. The words hung in the room. For years, Valen had worked inside a system where progress was measured by newer machines, faster procedures, and more complex solutions. The idea that something simple could expose a weakness was not just uncomfortable. It threatened the entire structure around them. Lyra opened the second patient file. The situation was worse than the first case. The Kesari child at the Academy Hospital had been stable for months before the latest treatment cycle failed. Now another patient, an adult researcher, was showing the same pattern. Different age, different medical history, same biological imbalance. This is spreading through our treatment centers, Lyra said quietly. Valen corrected her. No, the condition is spreading. Our treatment is simply not stopping it. Michael looked at the data. That distinction matters. They moved to an unused research room in the oldest section of the Academy. Without access to their main systems, they had to work with basic tools. For the students watching, it was strange. The greatest medical academy in the galaxy had returned to methods they considered outdated. Manual observation, written notes, patient history, human habits. Lyra watched Michael organize the information on paper. You really still use that? She asked. Sometimes. Why? Michael smiled. Because computers are excellent at remembering what we tell them. They are not always good at noticing what we forgot to tell them. That sentence stayed with her. For the next several hours, they compared every failed treatment. They looked for patterns hidden beneath thousands of pages of medical records. Then Lyra noticed something. Wait. She placed 2 files beside each other. These patients were treated in different hospitals. Michael leaned closer. Same medication? Yes. Same manufacturer? Yes. Valen looked at the information. Impossible. The treatment was approved by the Galactic Medical Standards Authority. Lyra continued searching. Her expression changed. Professor, a supply chain record appeared. The approved treatment came from the same company. The same company had funded the original research that created the treatment protocol. Michael said nothing. He did not need to. Valen understood. The problem was bigger than a mistake in medicine. A powerful organization had built its reputation around one solution, and admitting that solution was incomplete could cost them everything. The laboratory door suddenly unlocked. Everyone turned. A young medical assistant stood there, holding a data tablet. Professor Threx, I was told to deliver this personally. Valen accepted it. By whom? The assistant hesitated. Director Kale Oren. Michael watched carefully. What does he want? Valen opened the file. His face became serious. A private meeting. Lyra looked confused. After shutting down our research? Valen read the message again. He says he knows who blocked our investigation. Michael stepped closer. And? Valen looked up. He says the person responsible is not outside the academy. The room went quiet. Lyra slowly looked toward the locked laboratory door. Then someone here wanted us to stop. Valen closed the tablet. For the first time since this began, he looked less like a professor and more like someone preparing for a difficult truth. Then we find out why. Director Kale Oren chose the oldest conference room in the academy, a place with no holographic walls, no automated assistants, and one heavy door that locked from the inside. Michael noticed that immediately. Valen noticed something else. Kale looked tired. Not politically tired, not annoyed, but genuinely frightened. Lyra remained near the door, while Michael and Valen took seats across from him. You said someone inside the academy blocked our investigation, Valen began. Kale placed a small storage drive on the table. I lied. Valen's expression hardened. That is a terrible way to begin a private meeting. I know. Kale pushed the drive toward him. The order came from my office. Lyra stepped forward. You shut us down? Yes. Then you sent the warning? No. Kale looked at Michael. That came from someone trying to protect you. Michael stayed quiet. Kale continued. Years earlier, the Academy had discovered that repeated use of certain broad-spectrum treatments could damage the natural microbial communities of several species. The findings had never been published. The manufacturer, Meridian Biologics, argued that the evidence was inconclusive. The Medical Standards Authority agreed. Funding continued. The treatment became standard across hundreds of hospitals. Valen stared at him. You knew? I knew there were concerns. 11 months, Valen said. I treated that child for 11 months. Kale lowered his eyes. I know. The silence that followed was worse than shouting. Michael finally reached for the storage drive. What is on this? The original research. Kale looked toward the locked door. Including the microbial data your current database no longer contains. Lyra's face tightened. No longer contains? Meridian requested a database revision 7 years ago. They called the old material clinically irrelevant. Michael leaned back. There it was. Not some grand conspiracy to hide human superiority. Something far more ordinary. Money, reputation, bureaucracy, and people convincing themselves that inconvenient information could wait. Why tell us now, he asked. Kale looked at him. Because the second patient is my daughter. Nobody moved. Suddenly the polished administrator disappeared, and Michael saw a father sitting across the table. Her name is Mara, Kale said. She works in xenobiology. She entered the hospital yesterday. Valen's anger did not vanish, but it changed shape. Then help us reopen the laboratory. Kale shook his head. Meridian controls the treatment patents and half the Academy's clinical systems. If I formally reverse the restriction, they will bury us in legal challenges before morning. Michael picked up the drive. Then we do not fight them with opinions. Lyra understood first. We reproduce the old results. And ours, Michael said. Independently. Kale looked at the jar Michael had brought with him. You truly believe that substance is the answer? Michael sighed. No. That is the mistake everybody keeps making. The honey got us to ask a question. That is all. He tapped the storage drive. This is where the answer might be. They returned to the old research room and combined Kale's archived data with their new observations. Hours passed. Near midnight, Lyra found the missing connection. The harmless Kesari microbe produced a protective compound remarkably similar to the secondary compound created when the honey enzyme interacted with Kesari tissue chemistry. Michael stared at the two molecular models. There it is. Valen slowly understood. Honey was not the cure. It had accidentally imitated part of a natural defense system their treatments had disrupted. We were looking at the wrong miracle, Lyra whispered. Michael nodded. There was never a miracle. Valen immediately contacted the hospital. With Kale's authorization, they could begin a tightly controlled restoration protocol based on the patient's own biology rather than administering honey or another untested substance. Minutes later, the first simulation returned green. Then the second. Then the third. Lyra smiled for the first time in hours. But before anyone could celebrate, every screen in the room activated at once. Meridian Biologics had learned about the archived research. A legal injunction appeared across the Academy network, ordering all related data sealed immediately. Valen looked at Michael. They are going to erase it again. Michael glanced at the classroom broadcast controls, then at the hundreds of medical institutions connected to the Academy network. Not if everybody already has a copy. The injunction appeared across every screen in the old research room, but nobody moved. For years, those words would have been enough to stop the Academy. Seal the data. Suspend the research. Protect the institution. But this time was different. Because the information was no longer sitting inside one building. Lyra Voss looked at the network status and slowly smiled. Professor. Valen turned toward her. What is it? The archived research is already mirrored across the Academy network. Cale Oren stared at the screen. Who authorized that? Lyra looked at Michael. He simply raised a hand. I did. Valen blinked. While everyone was arguing about permissions, a small laugh escaped Lyra. It was the first normal moment they had experienced in days. Michael looked at the sealed notice. Knowledge is difficult to control once people have decided they need it. Within minutes, medical researchers from across the Galactic Alliance began accessing the files. Not because of a political announcement. Not because of a corporate presentation. Because doctors everywhere recognized the same thing. A question had been ignored for too long. The next several hours were a blur of verification, analysis, and careful testing. No one rushed. No one claimed victory early. That was the difference now. The researchers who had once searched for the fastest solution were finally taking the time to understand the patient. At the Academy Hospital, the Kesari child received the adjusted treatment approach under strict observation. Valen stood behind the glass with Michael, watching the medical readings change slowly. Not dramatically. Not like a movie. Real healing rarely happened that way. It happened through small improvements. A stable reading. A better response. A body beginning to recover its balance. Lyra walked into the observation room, holding the latest report. The immune response is stabilizing. Valen closed his eyes for a moment. A year ago, he would have called this impossible. Today, he called it a lesson. The patient? Michael asked. Lyra smiled. Improving. Across the galaxy, the story spread. Not as a story about a miracle substance. Not as a story about a primitive species defeating advanced civilizations. The truth was much simpler. Humanity had brought something the galaxy had forgotten. Humility. Months later, the Galactic Medical Assembly held a special conference. Doctors from hundreds of worlds gathered in the same hall where Valen once believed technology had already answered every question. This time, he stood beside Michael. No holographic display. No grand demonstration. Just two doctors talking. You know, Valen said quietly, when you first walked into my classroom, I thought you came here to prove humans were better than us. Michael smiled. A lot of people think that. Were they wrong? Michael looked around the room, filled with scientists from different worlds. I think every civilization makes the same mistake eventually. We start believing our tools are the same thing as wisdom. Valen nodded. And humanity avoided that mistake? Michael laughed softly. No, we just made different ones. That answer stayed with Valen longer than any medical discovery. Because that was the thing he had finally understood. Humans were not special because they had the best machines. They were not special because they had the oldest knowledge. They were special because they were willing to admit they did not know everything. The jar of honey that once made an entire classroom laugh was placed in the Galactic Medical Museum years later. Not as a medicine. Not as a symbol of human superiority. It sat behind glass with a simple description. A reminder that progress does not always come from creating something new. Sometimes it comes from remembering something we forgot. And whenever new students visited the exhibit, their instructors told them the same story. A story about a human doctor who walked into the most advanced medical academy in the galaxy, carrying something simple. A story about how the greatest discoveries sometimes begin with a question nobody thought to ask. And a story about how humanity never needed to prove it was the smartest species in the room. It only needed to remind the galaxy that wisdom was never measured by how advanced a civilization became. It was measured by whether that civilization was still willing to learn.